Oh, g'day mate, 40 here. Welcome back to 40 University. Today's class is sociology. Now, I reckon there are a lot of blokes out there who think, and even some Sheilas too, oh, if I just do this one weird trick, yeah, I'm good. So as long as I'm good with Jesus, I don't have to really sweat anything else. As long as I observe the commandments of the Torah, I don't have to sweat about status or anything else, or as long as I'm eating healthy, I don't sweat about anything else. And like, religion's not like this one weird trick whereby if you do it, then you're good. Like, as long as you're good with Jesus, then you can just like flow through life, or as long as you're getting all the anonymous gay sex that you crave, then you're good, and you don't have to worry about anything else. It's like, oh, I met this refugee bloke and I brought him home and he's got these particular skills and now I'm getting sexually satisfied on a regular basis. I don't really have to worry about anything else. Well, there's no one weird trick that just enables you to skate through life. Right? There's not like one answer. There's not like one thing that you finesse. It's not like, oh, I tick this box and now I'm good. Like, status, right? You don't get to escape from the status competition. And a lot of people think, oh, 40 is overly obsessed with status. Like 40, he's just got this moral and psychological and social weakness where he's overly obsessed with status. And I just think 40, he is at ease with the natural passions. Like when you look at me, do you not see a man who is at ease with the natural passions? Right? Do you think I'm sitting here judging you for the amount of anonymous gay sex that you're having? No, 40 does not judge. Right? I am at ease with the natural passions for sex, for fame, for love, for security, right? For status, for money, for honor. Right? This is a face that is at ease with the natural passions. Right? And I don't think that when you become spiritual, you then transcend the natural passions for sex, for love, for fame, for honor, for safety and security and status. Right? You never get to transform and graduate from the status game. Right? Because essentially your happiness level and your health is largely determined by your status level. All right? Your happiness and your health is largely determined by the quality of your attachments, which in large matter are going to be accounted for by your status level. If you're a total loser, right, even the most patient friends and family are going to want to start to distance from you. If you're consistently losing at life, there's no way you're not going to exhibit all the symptoms of major depressive disorder, or many of them. Right, so you may think, oh, I'm too smart, I'm too sophisticated, I'm too sexually nourished to be concerned about status games. Well, you may think that you don't care about status games, but status games care about you. You don't get to escape the status race. There is no escape, because essentially what depression is and anxiety is the same for humans as it is for other primates. It just means that you're losing at life. When you lose attachments, you're going to lose in status. When you lose in status, you're going to lose attachments. And when you're losing attachments and status, you're going to be plunging in your health, in your feeling of well-being, in your happiness, in even your own confidence in your own reality. Like if you have something significant happen to you today and you go call a friend and try to tell your friend about it, and they just get off the phone, they don't have time to talk to you. So you call someone else, a family member, and they don't have time to talk to you. 2-3 people essentially communicate to you. They have no interest in your anecdote about what happened today. You're going to start to question whether this really happened. Right? You're going to lose faith in your own ability to ascertain reality. You're going to lose faith in the reality of your own experiences. Now, I try to create a safe space here where we acknowledge and accept and we validate your lived experience. But you don't get enough of these spaces in your real life where people acknowledge you and acknowledge the reality of your experience and acknowledge your anecdotes, and they show some interest in you. You're gonna doubt yourself. Your grip on sanity, your grip on life is going to become attenuated. Right? You don't get to escape the status game. If other people don't want to hear your stories, you're going to doubt whether these stories even happen. You're going to doubt your own ability to be sane, your own ability to be living in reality. All right? We don't escape being a social animal and interacting with others. You walk into a room and people shy away from you, there's no way you're going to walk out of that room feeling better than when you walked in. Right? You go to places and people shy away from you, you're going to be unhappy, unsuccessful. You're going to have high levels of cortisol, stress hormone in your blood, and you're going to start to doubt your own sanity. On the other hand, you walk into a room, you walk into a group, and people are like, there's 40. Then I feel great. Right? Stress levels go down. My feeling of strength and energy goes up, and I feel a stronger grasp on reality, a stronger grasp on sanity when I am successfully, interacting and bouncing off other people. So there's no escape from the status game. Stalin had high status. Heavy is the head that wears the crown. So yeah, status does not solve all your problems in life, because guess what? There's no one weird trick that's going to solve all your problems in life. But life is relentless. It is endlessly challenging, and you don't get to escape from the challenge by doing yoga. Just because you can do headstands, you don't get to escape the challenges of life and the status game. So I like this essay on unheard.com by Ed West. Life is one big status game. So Captain James Cook was a major explorer from England in the last half of the 18th century. He played a big role in discovering Australia. And 2 decades before he landed in Australia, he was at sea and he was facing a desperate matter of life and death. The problem was scurvy, right? That's a deadly illness. It's caused by vitamin C deficiency. It's been the curse of sailors for centuries prior. They'd been dying of scurvy. So by the time he set sail for the South Pacific, where they have lots of free love in the South Pacific, in 1769, he had a lot of confidence in a remedy for scurvy. The problem was the remedy was sauerkraut, and sauerkraut was not a popular meal in England. So this was a time when eating vegetables was frowned upon. So how could he convince his crew to eat 7,860 pounds of fermented sauerkraut on their long journey east? So what did he do? He ordered that it be served only at the captain's table, not to the rest of the crew. So he noted in his journal, the moment they see their superior set a value on it, it becomes the finest stuff in the world. And that's how it works. When we see high status people doing things and saying things, we will naturally, consciously, unconsciously, subconsciously start to emulate them. Because everybody wants to rise in status, right? We have certain basic instincts that there is no escape from. We have an instinct towards sex and love. We have an instinct towards status. We have an instinct towards security, meaning both physical security and financial security. And you don't get to transform from these instincts. What you want is to have these instincts in proper proportion, right? If these instincts get out of control, then it's going to ruin your life. But these instincts in proper proportion are great. So you should always be cognizant of your safety, your financial well-being, securing love, and seeking status. Nothing wrong with it. So once the captain's table was serving sauerkraut, then the lower ranked players began requesting it. And before long, sauerkraut had to be rationed. So the number of men who died of scurvy on that expedition was a record-breaking 0. So the battle for status, it defines us. We never get to escape from it. There's not one weird trick where we get to escape from the battle for status. Right? Status provided the impetus for Homer's heroes, for Shakespeare's heroes. It's the subject of countless works of English literature and Russian literature. It's the inspiration for the most absurd fashions. Now, over the past few decades, status markers like accents and dress have leveled, and traditional barriers to social climbing or social falling have been reduced. So now people can fall much more dramatically than they used to be able to, because we have fewer things holding people up, because we're a less coherent, cohesive society as we have more diversity. And so our modern ways of signaling social status have become more nuanced, more competitive, and more vicious. So life is a status game. 3 methods by which we reach the top: dominance, competence, and virtue. Look, life is a spiral staircase, all right? There are 4 stages that we move through, and we never graduate from any one of these stages. We can always enter into a new stage without even realizing it. There's a stage of mastery when we become good at something. So I was struggling with some software recently, but every day that I was struggling and learning various forms of software, I knew that I was getting better. And then eventually the software became second nature. So I was afraid of learning OBS for years. Then I finally sat down, and within an hour I had grasped the fundamentals about 3 years ago. Okay, so life is a spiral staircase, 4 stages that we're always in one of these 4 stages. One is mastery, we get good at something. Another stage is grandiosity. So often we get good at something, and then that leads us to have an overinflated view of our own importance. So mastery very often leads to grandiosity, which is where we usually fall and make a total fool of ourselves, leading to feeling small in a big world. And the final stage is helplessness. All right. So you can be in mastery and trip and fall, and you're in helplessness. You can be in mastery and your back goes out and you're in helplessness. You can feel like you're in mastery and then you lose your job, lose your friends, lose your family, and you're in helplessness. So whatever stage we're in, we can always work on mastery. We can always develop more mastery. But life is a spiral staircase. All right, status game. 3 methods by which we reach the top. So there's dominance, which is connected with mastery. Then there's competence, which is mastery. And then there's virtue, right? So we use all of these methods to try to attain status. Now, virtue is probably the most interesting way to attain status, and probably the most dangerous way. And the desire for status based on virtue inspires immense cruelty. So status is extremely important to our health, right? Our health essentially reflects where we are in the status game. Yeah, you can be on top of the world, and then you run out of cough drops, and then where you are. Like, you can be getting all the anonymous gay sex you want, but you're out of cough drops. And you're trying to do a live stream, and you start getting a tickle at the back of your throat, and then where are you, mate? Right? So if we're more successful in our careers, we tend to live longer, right? So if we're feeling low status, that floods our bodies with stress hormones like cortisol, which puts us at much higher risk of major depression, anxiety, neurodegenerative diseases, heart disease, cancer, right? So being a loser can be fatal, right? We often only have a fragile hold on life. That's why the Torah keeps quoting God, pronouncing, I set before you this day a choice between life and death, choose life. So why is God saying, I've put before you a choice between life and death? Is acknowledging that it's so easy to choose death, all right? You're walking down the street and you want to get back together with your ex-girlfriend, and you think, oh, if I just get hit by a car, I'll go to the hospital, and then my ex-girlfriend will come and visit me, and we'll get back together, right? That's how close we are to choosing death. Or you're driving down the street and you're stressed at work and you just want to break, and you think, oh, wouldn't it be nice to just get into a moderate car accident so I can rest for a few days? Well, very easily these type of accidents can prove fatal. All right, so being a loser loosens your grip on life. It is frequently fatal. You could catch COVID while waiting in line for your 5th booster shot, all right? So people who feel low status are more likely to behave in an ugly way, which then increases their isolation and their low status. They're more likely to pick up destructive habits like smoking, eating sugar, because when you're low status and you're losing at life, the more desperate you need for distraction. So the more likely you are to turn to porn or anonymous gay sex or sugar, soda, caffeine, drugs, alcohol, anything, sports addiction, Netflix addiction, anything to get you out of reality. All right, so obviously being overweight is a sure outward sign that you're a loser at life. You walk into a high-rise in Manhattan or San Francisco or Los Angeles, there are very few fat people, right? You don't find among the upper classes, even the upper middle class, many fat people. There are very few successful people who are fat. So essentially being fat is just screaming to the world that you're a loser, and people react to you accordingly, right? So winners are generally slender, right? So losers are much more likely to kill themselves. They're they have much more. They have much less ability to deal with setbacks such as loss of a job or a divorce or losing a friend, losing a community. All right. So many men, many women find the status game so stressful that they simply drop out. But guess what? You don't really get to drop out of the status game. There is no escape. Now in Japan, you got more than 500,000 of the social withdrawal syndrome. They're just locked in their bedrooms playing video games. Yeah, why get sick when you could have a delicious sugar-free Ricola lozenge? So good. I mean, don't have more than three at a time, but just use it moderately, and it's wonderful. It tastes so good. Okay, among the benefits of high status is so real that many workers prefer a fancier job title over a pay raise, a better parking space over a pay raise. Our lust for status is insatiable, just like our lust for sex is insatiable, and our lust for financial and physical security is insatiable. We have these basic instincts. Our lust for these instincts is insatiable. If they get out of control, then they can ruin our life. Now, when a high status individual does something, we subconsciously copy, flatter, and conform. Right? This subconscious copy, flatter, conform programming is triggered, and we allow higher status individuals to alter our beliefs and our behavior. We mimic not just their behavior, but also their beliefs. The better we believe, the higher we rise. So in certain social circles, there are certain required beliefs, and you don't toe the line, you don't get to hang out in these cool circles. Right? So the more attuned we are to the belief systems of higher status people, the more likely we are to rise in status. The people will believe virtually anything if high status people suggest it. People will believe obviously untrue things if it's the cool and status way to go. So we tend to put a huge amount of effort into signaling and detecting status. So high status people tend to speak more often, to speak more freely, to speak more loudly, to speak more demonstrably. They're more facially expressive. They achieve more successful interruptions in conversation. Like when 40 speaks, other people listen. Right? Successful people will stand closer to us. They will touch themselves less. They'll use more relaxed, open posture. They'll have a steadier vocal tone. So our vocal tone and the frequency of our voice, the hum, changes to match that of higher status people. So there'll be workplaces where people will imitate the particular laugh of the boss or the vocal patterns of the boss, right? You can hear people just howling together. They're vocally members of the same tribe, that writes Ed West. So these status signals dominate our office life, our religious life, our corporate life, our individual life. And this is why Zoom conferencing can be far more exhausting than real life meetings, because it's harder to tell in a Zoom meeting whose body language tells you that they're high status, right? So in a normal meeting, you can just zone out when low status people are babbling away. So status, our drive for status, has pushed forward Western civilization. It's pushed forward the arts. Like the desire for status creates high-powered, live streaming performances like this one. Now, what about power postures? So I'm not sure, but definitely pulling in, the opposite of a power posture. So a tight, compressed, pulled down posture definitely screams that you're a loser. It's not all about the nookie. You can have all the nookie you want and still be low status in many areas of life. So art has been driven by the desire for status. In 18th century Britain, membership in certain clubs and societies became an important social marker. So the number of learned societies rose from 50 in 1750 to 1500 in 1850. This had an enormous impact on education, wealth, and science. British cooking has improved dramatically from the 1980s with the rising prestige associated with leading chefs. But status games do wonderful things. They can also be toxic. They do horrible things to people. So political beliefs, religious beliefs are also status markers, and they become more important as status markers in recent decades as other status markers have declined in importance. So people adopt positions not just out of sincerity, not just out of partisan loyalty, not just out of conformity, but to signal social status, to align with something that looks good, right? The aesthetics is a huge influence on political choices. You want a type of politics that puts forward a certain aesthetic that matches who you aspire to be. So crime and immigration, all right? Liberal positions on crime and immigration are associated with higher education levels and in many circles with higher status. So low status members of society are less likely to benefit from freedom of movement. They're more likely to be victims of crime. And so their vulgar views on crime and immigration, the same views that I hold, which are that crime is a huge problem and we should be very tough on criminals and we don't need any more immigration. Right? These are low status perspectives in many circles, right? Because lower status people are less likely to benefit from freedom of movement, more likely to be victims of crime, more likely to lose from immigration. Now, the rise of modernism at the end of the 19th century, that came about because the masses became literate for the first time. So when the masses became literate, the upper classes wanted to be able to distinguish themselves from the newly literate masses, and so modernism arose as a repudiation of everything traditional and accessible. So with the rise of daily newspapers and the rise of radio and movies and TV, then higher status people needed to go off in esoteric directions to show that they are higher status than the great unwashed who read newspapers and magazines. So you've got modernist architecture, which we almost all hate, right? The only reason that you'd love, modernist art is it's your way of showing your high status. Pre-20th century buildings consistently sell for more money. They're more beautiful, even though they have huge technological disadvantages. Dislike of modernist architecture is one of the few things that every single demographic agrees on. Black, white, Asian, male, female, rich, poor, young, old. Right? They all prefer the vernacular style of architecture. But there's one section of society which disagrees, and that's architecture students. And the longer someone studies architecture, the more pro-modernist their views. So the longer someone studies literature, the more pro-modernist their views. The longer someone studies art, the more pro-modernist their views. Because you become attuned to status signals and you want to mark yourself out as a sophisticate as opposed to the hoi polloi who share Prince Charles's love of pastiche. So if the public suddenly decides that they like the stuff that wins architectural awards, then the high status people have to go off in a new direction. So people will tend to repeat untruths such as there's no such thing as race if they feel it helps their social position. So all societal debates are in part a status competition, in particular the quest for moral status. So we have learned to use virtue to raise our social status because our commitment to virtue shows that we've got a commitment to the wider community. So virtue inspired like the witch hunts of the 17th century, the ritual child abuse panics of the 1980s, all right? And now QAnon is a perverse type of virtue signaling. Like, you know that there's some more powerful evil enemy out there who's abusing children. Then we've got all this social media led bullying, right? This is always framed in terms of protecting the weak, protecting them from harm. So the more people imagine themselves as protecting the vulnerable, the more horrendous their behavior. So you could call this altruistic evil. People do terrible things out of love and a desire to appear virtuous, right? It's a status game. Seek the maximal removal of their opponents, ideally to deliver unto them reputational death. So when the mob grows into a status gold rush, massive blast of vindictive energy gets directed at the victim. And then attracted by the prizes of social status for being a virtue signaler, more and more ambitious players pile in. The game becomes an animal of attack, and people begin glorying with the ecstasy of dominance. So status is not just important to individuals, it's also important to groups. People feel their collective success and failure intensely. Like if your team wins the Super Bowl, you're going to feel great. If your group is rising in status, you're going to feel great. If your group is declining in status, you're going to be sad and mad. Right? When your group is on top, you're going to feel happy. So modern day identity politics has unleashed a competition for status that can never end. So people keep wanting to raise the status of one group. They want to increase the prestige of the ancestors through this one group. So we're rediscovering like women in history, gays and lesbians in history, blacks in history, influential people of color in history, to try to raise the status of these oppressed groups. But status is a zero-sum game, right? Unlike wealth, this pie cannot be expanded. If your group rises in status, other groups must fall. And the psychological and physical effects of losing are real. The desire for status can never be overcome. It will always be with us, but that doesn't mean you have to give in to it completely. Just recognize it's a natural instinct, but if you let it get out of control, then you're in trouble. Oh, that's easy. Which is higher status? Pronouncing status with a long A, status, or a short R, status. Status is far more prestigious than status. Steve Saylor's got a great column here. Why do Americans treat COVID vaccines and ivermectin and hydroxychloroquine as jealous gods between whom they must choose, in which to put all their faith in? Why not just consider these complementary plans A, plans B, plan C? So when it comes to your health, why not have a multi-layered plan of defense roughly worked out ahead of time, right? Perhaps based on how long each element takes to be effective. So vaccines kick in with effectiveness after 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 weeks. And how likely your doctor is to give, a particular medicine without you having to make an extraordinary case for it. So if you're a typical American, losing weight will be a sizable help in how bad COVID could turn out for you. And it also will improve your health and your social status in many other ways, and your self-esteem. It's a good idea to buy a pulse oximeter. So I got a pulse oximeter here just to check oxygen levels in my blood to see if everything's hunky-dory. So if it gets under 90, you're in trouble. And let's see how I'm doing. So normally I go around at about 99. Yeah, so I think I'm about 99, 98. Yeah, I'm 99. So the oxygen is just flooding through my blood. But I bought a pulse oximeter for, $40 on Amazon. So that way you can tell how whether you need to go to the hospital or not. If it drops under 90, you need to go to the hospital because you're not getting enough oxygen in your blood. All right, so getting vaccinated, obviously that helps, but apparently the efficacy of vaccinations tends to wane with time. So the current Delta variant is so infectious it tends to overwhelm the vaccine's high levels of efficacy, but it still remains a strong line of defense against hospitalization. Yeah, how well do you sleep? Get an overnight sleep test, or just set your phone up to record you sleeping, and you can see whether you're gasping, or you can check in the various apps that will tell you about the quality of your sleep. So the medical community has learned better ways for treating COVID. That's why it's a good idea to try to wait as long as possible before you get COVID, because the medical community keeps becoming better and better, more effective at treating COVID. Right, so now if you become critically ill, medical staff will give you dexamethasone without you needing to ask for it. And Regeneron, that's what Trump got last October. It's free, but it's not necessarily widespread at present. Now, Joe Rogan says he's taking monoclonal antibodies for his current case of COVID, which sounds like a Regeneron cocktail. Then there's ivermectin, which is a horse medicine. I mean, there's fluvoxamine, there's hydroxychloroquine, there's molnupiravir, there's Brazilian viper venom. There are all these like off-the-wall remedies. And you may find a doctor who's sympathetic, but you may need to study up on what's the precise dosage for a human of your weight and under which conditions do these medications recommended, and maybe you need to write it down until you get really sick and you're not getting as much oxygen to your brain to work things out. So multiple layers of defense seems pretty sensible to me. Why don't more Americans approach COVID this way? But Americans seem to decide, oh, this particular line of defense, this is what I'm going to invest all my hopes and dreams and faith in, and then they deride every other line of defense as if each layer of defense only works if you believe 100% in it and you don't believe in any other, right? So American true believers, you know, they tend to enjoy making fun of true believers in other faiths. So it might be wise to come up with a plan B in case plan A doesn't work. And if plan B doesn't work, it might be good to have plan C as well, right? Why put all your faith in one line of defense? Why not think about multiple layers of defense ahead of time before you get sick? Bye.